and welcome to Edgy Ideas, the podcast that explores what it means to live a good life and to create a good society in our disruptive age. My name is Simon Western, and I will be talking to invited guests about diverse topics, exploring social, conscious and unconscious dynamics and desires. Welcome to this episode of Edgy Ideas. Today I have a very special guest, Dr Eliat Aram. Eliat has been CEO of the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations since 2008. She is a registered Gestalt psychotherapist and a chartered scientist psychologist. Eliat has studied complexity theory and a doctorate focused on learning as a potential transformation of identity. Eliat's a very experienced and innovative group relations practitioner and has directed the Tavistock Institute flagship Leicester conference on numerous occasions. Eliat, you're very welcome to Edgy Ideas. How are you today?
Very well, thank you, Simon. Thanks for asking me to do this podcast.
Well, I'm delighted to have you here. As you know, I'm a great fan of the Tavistock Institute and been very inspired by its work. So let's discuss the Tavistock Institute today. And you've been chief executive since 2008, and it's got a long history. When was it founded? Was it
1947?
47, yeah. And would you just like to share with the audience what its purpose was when it was founded?
Same as it is today, to study the dynamics of individuals in their groups, organizations, and society in order to better conditions and relationships in the workplace. And that study is through a range of methodologies, from research, later on evaluation, was developed as a field of work, and very much many of the methods of organizational development and change, leadership development, and of course, as you mentioned, the experiential learning program known as Group Relations, with the Leicester Conference in its centre.
Yeah, I mean, it's had a huge impact in the field of organizational kind of theory and practice, but also you work within wider society, don't you? You have a kind of a social perspective to your work.
Yeah, socio-political, you might even say. So it's not a political affiliated organization, but it definitely works with a political dimension of society, locally and internationally.
Yeah.
And the practitioners at the Institute, many of us have a political science background, in addition to other social science, and increasingly more humanities and arts as well.
Yeah, I've noticed that shift into, like, you have an interest in art and aesthetics, and there's quite a kind of shift to that creative kind of way of working, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. We are really cutting edge, if you like, with a very serious organizational and arts practice, both through programs of consultancy related, deepening the practice in organizational practice, but also a PhD program that has recently been agreed, and other programs of work in organizations that are either arts-based or want to introduce a more sophisticated approach to the practice using arts. So very different to arts and crafts kind of idea. It's art as a theory and a methodology into the practice, including actually the whole aspect of archiving history in the present and the future in the present.
Yeah, very interesting. The Institute's got a very long list of kind of famous social scientists and people who have worked on this, and what interested me was just how diverse the engagement is from psychoanalysts to social scientists. It's one of its strengths, isn't it? You pull in people from very different professions and backgrounds.
Yeah, so there are like two questions in what you've said. I think one is to do, as I heard it, in that one of the maybe struggles of an institute that's existed for a long time. This is our 75th anniversary as an institute. So how much can you still continue to be creative and innovative without forgetting the history, and how do you continue to, if you like, thrive on the shoulders of giants? Yeah. So that's one question. And the other one that I heard is the fact that we are very multidisciplinary inside the institute, and that has, of course, its own difficulties in terms of finding and integrating across the various ways of thinking and working, but also a huge creative and innovative potential.
Yeah.
So it continues to be a place which really relies a lot on the capacity of people to work autonomously, to be interdependent, and very much work with the principles of what the Tavistock was established on, which is around autonomy, being resourceful, being able to work together with other people, but also on one's own, with a certain degree of maturity, I would say.
Yeah. And the one of the big focuses of the institute has always been on learning from experience, and that leads us into group relations work. You recently gave a talk at Opus on Eric Miller, and was it Miller and Rice who founded the group relations conferences?
I would say Eric Miller didn't really found group relations. Funnily enough, he wasn't one of the founding members of the institute either. He came roughly 10 years later. He came as a mentee of Ken Rice, and they just started that experiential learning way of working, which is really very based, and that's a big part of my talk, was to demonstrate that really through the writing, through the history, is based on anthropology, because Eric Miller's, as well as Ken Rice's, first professional identity is anthropology and social anthropology, and it very much shows in the way that they were thinking, for example, and the model of group relations really is based on action research. I would say arguably that psychoanalysis comes a little later, and mainly the focus is on system psychodynamics. So it's how open systems theory, the phenomenon in front of you, yourself as an action researcher, and psychoanalytic ideas come together into this thing that we call looking at the processes which are under the surface, hidden or sometimes unconscious.
Yeah. So did Bjorn work with Rice in those conferences? Was he a part of that, or did they just use his ideas? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think in the very early aspects of it, definitely. I think it did. I have to check the records to be really giving you an answer on that. But what is for sure is that experiences in groups, so Bjorn's famous book, which was first published in chapters, in segments, in the first few issues of Human Relations.
Yes,
were very much at the heart of the thinking, of the real, that kind of thinking, which is the group is something else than the individuals, but it's not exactly the same as the Gestalt idea of the whole is larger than the sum of its parts. It's different. It's the notion of the group has an identity or a life on its own, which is largely unconscious, but is influenced and also influencing the individuals that make it up, is very much at the heart, and the basic assumptions that he identified, as you know, then other people developed a few more, are very much still really part of the thinking that informs the practice of group relations. But you see, another thing I said at the talk is that Eric Miller, later on, he took on the concept from Bion around when Bion later on was trying to fit it in more into a psychoanalytic lens, and Eric Miller actually challenged that. He didn't like that. He said that it's a psychologizing of group relations. So for him, it was always important to stay more at the level of natural human and also non-human phenomenon, because he was very taken by research on apes, for example, and he wrote about that in it's published both in Human Relations and in a book that now escapes me, which was based on a conference celebrating 100 years to the birthday of Bion. It was in Turin. David Armstrong chaired that committee, and he helped me find that perspective as well. And then I read the paper. I can direct you to the paper.
Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, psychoanalysis, how it does and doesn't fit into this work, how it kind of, there's a tension there, isn't there? It informs it at one level, but as you know, I was trained at the clinic and worked at the clinic, and I found that the psychoanalysis, and now in my work, I'm still very attached to psychoanalysis as a way of working, but you have to always kind of guard against pathologizing too much or psychologizing too much with that work when you're in the workplace. There's a sort of balance to working in that way, I think, which I'm aware of.
Yeah.
But group relations is still vibrant and alive. Is incredible, isn't it? It's still kind of such a
yeah.
Is it growing? Is it stabilizing? How do you see it as a learning experiential kind of practice at the moment?
I think it remains a very critically important, fundamental, helpful way of thinking for anybody who works or is interested in organizational life, but also in understanding the relationship between one's role in the context that they are operating in. So I don't know that I would talk about it in those linear terms of growth and all of that. You know, there's group relations practice across the globe in many countries. I find particularly rewarding places that apply those principles to their local context. I think the Leicester Conference remains unique in its offering because it's kind of basic in the sense that it's fundamental in another way. It's one conference that brings people together for 2 weeks, which is a long time. It's half of a month. People have to really take time out of their ordinary lives and dedicate it to this. And it's probably the most international encounter possible in many ways. You know, in the past, I remember conferences where you would see a row of people sitting when you look at them, you're really moved beyond belief, because the Iranian is sitting next to the American, who's sitting next to the Russian, who's sitting next to the Indian or the Pakistani, who's sitting next to the Israeli, who's sitting next to the Palestinian, and you're thinking, wow, if only we could bring this gathering together in other contexts, we could really have dialogue. And in Leicester, it's possible. And this year, we're anticipating something similar around the presence of the Russians and other people from Eastern Europe, maybe Ukrainians, alongside the Western world, and maybe enable some kind of a dialogue in times of war, because one of the main purposes of a group relations way of working is to not split, is to work towards an understanding of difference and across boundaries, not by ignoring boundaries, but by understanding how we might find the other. For those interactions with a better insight into ourselves. So in that, it's a very unique, and I think remains something that has a future and is important to keep and continue. And I think I told you before that we managed to keep Leicester Conference and this way of working going in person throughout the pandemic. So we very much work with the notion of the fractals. In that sense, the size of it doesn't matter. It still continues to be a representative coming together. It's a representative pattern of whatever happens in the world at the time. So it makes it very interesting and important coming together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's and if anybody gets an opportunity, you should go onto the Institute's website and look at the Leicester conference. I've been to many group relations conferences, but I got to Leicester once because it is a big commitment, and but it actually did change my career. It was like I did get a real insight into how I worked in groups and how they worked in me, and it did kind of lead me to a complete career change through kind of understanding myself through that process of learning. So yeah, I would highly recommend it to people. And like you say, it's got a wider purpose, I think, because as a fractal, it does kind of allow you to really kind of work on key social issues and what authority means today and what authoritarianism means and all those kind of big questions, which are so important.
Yeah. Yeah, and the principles of it are relevant to any work of any consultant, really. It's
no, absolutely. I mean, I recommend all the people to come on the Analytics Network coaching courses, and it's interesting with coaches. So often they don't have that kind of wider group as a whole perspective or that wider systems perspective, and it's so necessary. So I really encourage people to go on group relations work to sort of get that wider understanding of organizations. What else are you working on in the Institute at the moment, which is interesting for you? What else is...
Well, one of the things that has captured us in the last year, which is also a continued evolution from areas of interest of mine around arts and aesthetics, is also the relationship between humans and their spaces. Mm-hmm. So for various reasons, we have had to and also chosen to move the office. It's coming up to a year that we did that. And the new office space, other than structurally, it's a really beautiful space, but we also paid a lot of attention to the liminal aspects of it, to the ergonomics of it, and to the multitude of purposes that we want to have available here. Also, given the fact that the workplace itself has had to rethink itself following the pandemic, and all of that is reflected in this space, which we have very carefully curated, Rachel Kelly and myself mainly, and it's really nice to see how it's slowly growing and developing into itself and becoming, and maybe and will become more, of that place that we want it to be. And I think it's a very important, there's a lot of learning potential in that also to be disseminated to other workplaces that perhaps want to do something similar. There is some things that can be learned and taught from this process. And also in its own right, it embodies this, which we are very interested in at the moment, the art at work, the art of work. We have an in-house gallery here of artists in residence that at the moment is permanent, but it will be shifting. So all of these things interest me in that aspect of my working life as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm finding a similar interest. I find myself when I'm doing leadership development and coaching work, talking a lot more about place and about the environment. And it's I talk about how the social, the technological, and the ecological come together, and it's like the trilogy, the Tavistock trilogy. You know, you're working from the social technical to the social ecological. And I talk about the built environment and locating yourself and the nature place. And it's just so important how the environment shapes our whole being, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and the environment, of course, is very important for us to think about these days.
Yeah.
And so that relationship, so we can actually continue into a future as humanity, is also something that we are concerned with in terms of our small contribution, perhaps, into that. Yeah, and again, you know, one of the Tavistockians, Donald Winnicott, who wrote about, he was a psychoanalyst, but he has this beautiful chapter called "The Place Where We Live," which is, you know, always a question to continue to think about and reflect on. So how can a workplace that wants to remain generative, how can it be offering both the structures and the certainties that are required for a workplace in terms of being an employing place where people have to earn the bread from, but also be a potential space where people can have the freedom to create, to innovate, to find and new things, and obviously with that to make mistakes, to learn from them.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. I've been reading architects' work at the moment because it's just the way the architects think about space is just so interesting, and urban development is kind of, I've been like delving into urban development because it's such an interesting field.
They redid the space next to us, the architects, and I was so disappointed. I can't tell you, it's just the most boring looking standard office ever.
Yeah.
So yes, they have interesting writing, but somehow when push comes to shove, they just go back to standard or ordinary, it seems to me.
Yeah, no, it's really disappointing. I mean, like in Ireland, there's a massive housing shortage, and they're trying to get a huge building program. And I'm just so anxious about it because I know they're going to just really chuck up kind of cheap, kind of thoughtless kind of housing just to kind of fill the space. But there's so much brilliant architecture around, so much potential around, so much sustainable kind of, I mean, you can use those spaces just so creatively. You go to different countries and see it in different places, and it's so kind of inspiring and opens up a whole different way of kind of living and thinking. If you
I think one of the problems, though, is that to do all of that sustainable work, you actually need money and a lot. And I think that for a place like us, and maybe, you know, for people who think like you and me, I think it's quite a challenge, a socio-political challenge, really. And I don't quite know what the solution for that is, but
there are some brilliant low cost, innovative kind of sustainable stuff happening as well. The different materials they have today. I mean, there's. I'm just very, very interested in the whole idea of urban design and you know, I talk about kind of eco leadership and ecosystems. I'm actually finding that some of the greatest work where eco leadership is taking place is in kind of urban centres where people are thinking so creative. They have to think with kind of other people around policies. So you bring transport together, you bring living together, you bring business together, you bring all these things. It demands an ecosystem way of thinking, really, and done well, it is quite brilliant. Like, you know.
Yeah. Agree.
Do you have you noticed through the group relations work you've done over your experience a change in the way people are thinking around authority or identity? I mean, we see like in the US and we see identity politics and stuff coming to the fore very strongly. How do you kind of see that showing up in the group relations work you're doing?
I think that there is a tendency, predominantly in the US, but maybe not only, to make group relations or use it or treat it or see it as a social justice movement. I'm not a fan. I think group relations way of working is about, again, it's back to the principles of anthropology. It's about observing a phenomena and trying to make sense of it, understand it, study it, relate to it, find the same old concept, find your authority in relation to it. But it's, in order for it to be truly group relations, it has to, the personal values have to be put to one side. Otherwise, it becomes another version of what it tries to fight, which is a certain social or political point of view. So in my work in the US, one of the greatest challenges of the last 5 years, every time, because I have worked in the US regularly, is to leave space for the other. And the other has been in this milieu very much, let's say, a Trump supporter. So how to make sure that those voices are allowed in a group relations conference? Because if they're not there, or if they sit quietly, then what's the point of having a group relations conference? The whole point is that people exist from all the spectrum of society, and this is not about a particular stance of. I've seen, particularly in the last 2 years with all the online conferences, that has become more and more apparent that that's what people are doing. And at least us at the Tavistock, we really hold on to the principles of making space for what is and what has to become, and make sense of that in the bionic sense, without memory or desire.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I've been invited to join a panel to talk about group relations and social activism. So it's good we're having this conversation.
I would say it's fine if one defines it as one application of group relation. You can use principles of that, but to make every group relations conference a social activism space, then I think it's I think it's against the primary task of a group relations conference, really.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to the AK Rice members a couple of weeks ago about the Ukraine war, and I wrote that paper about taking a stance on the war, and I was differentiating. I was saying this is not about AK Rice becoming a social movement or becoming a social activist. But that's not what it's about. But the work also allows you to kind of it doesn't mean that you can't speak out against a war, or you can't neutralize yourself from taking an ethical stance in the world, but that doesn't mean that you kind of become social activists in that kind of movement. For me, it sounds like, I think it's like the Tavistock Institute was, as I understand it, was a kind of a project about kind of improving working life for humans and organization for society, for democratizing kind of the workplace after the kind of experiences of the war and the Second World War and fascism and all the terrors and horrors of that. And but you do that, it's almost paradoxical. You do that by creating a space without kind of a prior agenda or kind of a social activism.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're saying, that to better to understand what's going on, you have to kind of have that open space to kind of work.
Yeah, and I also think it relates to the role and in which role you're at in any particular moment. So if your role is to direct a group relations conference, that is not the place for you to express your own, even though they may well be known, but the purpose of the conference has to transcend that, I think.
Yeah.
Well, otherwise, what you will end up having is people exactly like you.
Yeah. You just kind of continue to build the culture war, don't you? Sort of, we're the good self and they're the bad self, and you just kind of you get people working on. And the
thing is, the criticism on group relations is that it already attracts people who are more thinking about social and political dynamics, are more prone to be helpful in the world that they live in, are more prone already to be good citizens, so to speak. So in some ways, it's already attracting not the full spectrum of humanity, but nevertheless, they learn a lot about their own shadows, if you like, or their uncontrolled dynamics, which simmer under the surface.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. We're coming to an end, and Eliat, and I have a couple of questions for you just at the end. Is there anything else about the Tavistock Institute which we haven't shared, which is on your mind at the moment, which you'd like to share with the audience? Any other kind of work you're doing? You do research and evaluation as well, don't you? Just kind of that's a part of your work, as I know.
Yes, we do a lot of, it's quite a big part of our work, and we do a lot of work in Europe. We're managing to straddle Brexit and continue to be working with partners in Europe around various interesting aspects of organizational life, like teleworking was one of the recent researches that I have been fortunate to contribute to, which studied the impact of this working from home, essentially, model that we were forced into, but also has quite a lot of challenges. We work in mental health, children and young people's mental health. I've been fairly vocal around my position on the injustice that young people have suffered in those 2 years of lockdown, and how much they suffered, and there's tremendous evidence coming out of mental health of young people has deteriorated significantly in those 2 years. Yes. And as a psychotherapist myself, I've had more referrals than I've had in the past, and to refer people on is also very difficult because people are just practitioners, therapists, psychiatrists are just completely overwhelmed in all the services and in private practice. So I think there's a lot of work coming still to work through the trauma experiences of this pandemic. Some things we know already, like how bad domestic violence and has been, and the Tavistock Institute, I think, continues to have. We have, and it's on the website. People can read about some of the work we've done during the pandemic around those issues. And I think there will probably be more. I just hope that governments continue to invest in that, in mental health in the workplace, and mental health of young people and older people. I think older people have been so-called protected by staying at home, but I think a lot of them have been traumatized by that and by not seeing their families.
I think you're right. I think young people and old people and people having to be forced to work at home for so long, I think the intensity and the mental health issues I consult to many different organizations, and I'm getting more and more kind of requests for referrals for mental health sort of counseling and support. And just as the stresses is there, it's I think there's a huge hidden tsunami of challenges.
Yeah, and I think the aggression that we're seeing around the world as well, including the Russian aggression that we're seeing, I think it also is a response to this period that is yet to be explored and understood.
Yeah.
So we don't repeat it.
Yeah. Very, very interesting work you're doing, Eliat. And again, I'd recommend you have a Leicester conference coming up. Is it in August or July?
In August, yeah. Well, 30th of July for 2 weeks.
So good luck with that, and recommend any of the listeners to get onto your Tavistock Institute website and really have a look at that. It's a wonderful experience if you do get an opportunity. I ask all my guests questions at the end. I'd like to ask you what it means to live a good life and create a good society. Is there anything from your experiences, Eliat, which you can share with our audience around what it means to live a good life and create a good society?
Oh my God.
Big questions.
I think to live a good life, you need to be, when you reflect on it, I suppose, you need to be able to say to yourself that you've done something that has been meaningful for you, and to hold on to the thought that if you've done something meaningful for you, then probably in some way that we might not be able to see straight away, it probably has had an impact, in the butterfly effect kind of a way on something wider. But I'm trying to answer your question without thinking in terms of myself, because it's not, I'm in the helping profession, so to speak, but not everybody is. I don't think to do something meaningful, it only means one thing. So whatever role one has in their life, whatever role, whatever story people are finding themselves, or context people are finding themselves born into, I think to have a good life is to know that you have done it might sound a bit cliche, but you have done your best to be the best that you can be within the context that you're in.
Sure.
What was the second part of the question?
How to create a good society.
I think to stay inside of it. I think before I joined the Tavistock Institute, what I remember thinking is that how can one be an organizational consultant without having the experience of working in an organization? And I think also for you, really, if I can say that, I think you had a huge career transition when you chose to take up a leadership position of an organization, happened to have been ISPSO, step into the difficulties, and then because there's nothing like experience to give you, just to give one the skill to advise or help or consult or role model to others. So I think the reason I was against Brexit, for example, was because I think, yes, there are a lot of things that are not going very well in the European project, but I'm not sure that the way to work through those and fix those is from the outside. I think you have to fight from the inside, and that's why I'm still here, really.
Yeah. That's wonderful, Eliat. That's something I keep sharing from Donna Haraway's work, is that we have to stay with the trouble, and that kind of aligns. And
I think probably for locally, the most contemporary example of that is the fact that we don't have a Met Police Commissioner at the moment, and and how difficult it is to find somebody to take up that role that is considered so tough. Maybe some people say toxic, but I think requires a transformation, because no role is inherently problematic. I think it's something about how you understand and take it up and work within the context to change it.
Sure.
And that's an important role for our society, at least locally in the UK. Very
important. Eliat, thank you so much for joining us on Edu Ideas. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Travel well and keep up the good work.
Thanks for pushing me through this.
Pleasure. Thank you for listening to Edu Ideas. If you enjoyed our podcast and would like more information about our coaching, training and events, please contact Simon@analyticnetwork.com. Thank you for listening.